Get those fingers ready to scream at me that I am too low on Chuba Hubbard this week. Tier 1, honestly, doesn't matter. You're starting every single one of these guys regardless. If you don't have Barkley, CMC, Achane, Mixon, Henry, Kyron, Gibbs in your lineup, I don't know what you're doing. Tier 2, we'll start off with Kenneth Walker. With Walker, yes, it was a tough matchup this past week against San Fran. He still gets there with the rushing touchdown, which is really nice to see. Now, of course, the yardage isn't there. He doesn't have a ton of volume. But this week actually should be a much better spot going up against the Arizona Cardinals. If you're looking at the implied team total that you have right now in Seattle, it's actually at 24.5 points. Sportsbooks are putting Seattle offense as one of the higher scoring offenses in the NFL. And it's not like Charbonnet is taking a ton of volume at this point. Josh Jacobs, I want to reiterate, maybe we were a little too high on him coming into the season, but the man's coming on extremely strong. You have 80% of the snaps this past week against the Chicago Bears. You get the usage as a receiver. You get the usage as a rusher. So again, I want to reiterate why we love Jacobs in drafts this year. He's a 3-down running back and one of the best offenses in the league. Now, this week, you do have a tough matchup on paper going up against the Niners. Now, one thing I was surprised to see is you actually have sportsbooks putting the Green Bay Packers as 2.5-point favorites, which, to be completely honest with you, I don't necessarily get, but they have an implied team total of 25 points. The only thing I'd be on the lookout for is if Marshawn Lloyd's good to go, does Lloyd take any usage as a receiver? Now, I'm very excited to have James Conner back for my fantasy football team. I mean, I understand that the 2 weeks before the bye, you did see a little bit of Trey Benson, but both of his games were blowouts against the Chicago Bears as well as against the New York Jets. I mean, in this spot, you actually should have a much tougher game going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Spread on this game's about 1 point. And if we go back and look at what we have seen with James Conner all season, in close games, they use him heavily. The last 2 close contests that you've had for the Arizona Cardinals were against the Los Angeles Chargers and Miami Dolphins. And in both game environments, James Conner has 20 plus opportunities. He sees 80+% of the snaps, should be fully healthy coming out of the bye. And it's been an offense that has been hyper productive as of late. Now, going over to our next option, we are going to be looking at David Montgomery. With Montgomery, obviously, this past week, it was the best matchup you could ever ask for. You had a spread on that game that I think was 14 points before kickoff. The Lions projected to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL. Now, this week, yet again, the Lions project out to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL with an implied team total about 29.25 points. They are 8-point favorites over the Indianapolis Colts. So yet again, should get a ton of rushing attempts here in Detroit, a ton of points scored. Montgomery is going to have a lot of that. And then Jonathan Taylor will be here at 12. I mean, with Taylor, yes, every single week you can pencil him in for 20 plus opportunities. However, this week, it is going to be a pretty tough matchup going up against the Detroit Lions. And again, I do want to reiterate that with Richardson under center, you do need to be somewhat concerned that Jonathan Taylor will get vultured at the goal line, while at the same time, you have a lower checkdown rate and fewer targets out of the backfield in general. Now, our next running back is going to be Brian Robinson. Now, with Robinson against the Eagles, it was a tough matchup last Thursday. Now, I'll say this Thursday, the game's going to be a lot uglier. You actually have the Browns and Steelers playing. But one thing that could be exciting is you actually get a free Jameis Winston more than less than half a total yard pick on Underdog Fantasy if you use promo code FLOCK. And if you are looking at what you want to pair that up with on Underdog, for everyone who's been screaming at me that I'm quote unquote too low on Cedric Tillman, you're more than welcome to take the higher than 43.5 receiving yards. But I don't know if the Tillman fanboys are still here. Of course, use code FLOCK. You'll get that 50% deposit bonus, the free Jameis Winston pick, more than less than half a total yard, and you'll be getting a free team review in the live stream we're doing every single night. Just use the link in the comment section or the description. But looking at Brian Robinson, you don't really have much of a role as a receiver, so you really are a touchdown or bust. But in this game environment in particular for Brian Robinson, it's going to be a safe assumption to say that you see that touchdown. You currently have an implied team total of 27.5 points. So sportsbooks are putting the Commanders as the second highest scoring offense in the NFL. Not only are you getting that projection, but at the same time, you have a massive spread in this game of about 10 points. So the Commanders very easily should be able to run the ball in the second half. Now, going over to Isaiah Pacheco, obviously, we are going to have to monitor the practice reports that we have all week. I'll be updating you every single night in the live streams as always. But the thing with Pacheco is you probably don't get the luxury of playing it slow with him. If he's back in week 12, you have a matchup against the Carolina Panthers where the Chiefs are over 10-point favorites. Not only are the Chiefs over 10-point favorites, but at the same time, this is the best defense you can possibly go up against if you are an opposing running back. So I would say that you probably have to play Pacheco if he's good to go. Obviously, there'll be a difference between him getting cleared maybe on Thursday versus him being a game time decision. If he's a game time decision, we will lower him down our rankings and our expectations in general. I'm going over to our next call. We're going to be looking at J.K. Dobbins. With Dobbins, this past week, you get there with the multiple rushing touchdowns. Obviously, great performance against Cincinnati. There is a red flag, though, in that, one, this is a game in which you actually have the Baltimore Ravens as favorites. So the possibility that the Chargers have to abandon the run is there. And you're looking at a running back that has seen the volume dip since Gus Edwards has come back in. You actually have 66% of the snaps 2 weeks ago. And this past week, you actually only get 12 total opportunities. So obviously, it's a phenomenal offense. J.K. Dobbins looks great, but there are definite red flags that need to be addressed. And I think that's why you can't put him as an RB1. Now, Aaron Jones very much has some red flags here as well. Where Aaron Jones, one, it's a tougher matchup going up against Chicago in comparison to what we've seen over the previous 3 weeks with Indy, Jacksonville, and Tennessee. And two, you're actually looking at Cam Akers getting involved this past week. Now, I think maybe the Akers involvement is a little bit blown out of proportion because obviously Akers is the one with the receiving touchdown. But still, you are looking at the amount of snaps played down for Aaron Jones at 53%. Now, this should be a closer game. Also, Jones is another week removed from the injury, so maybe he's healthier. I still think you probably start him, but it's definitely going to be a situation in which you need to monitor the usage that we have with Cam Akers going into the future. DeAndre Swift will be our next running back. I'm stuck starting Swift in the Flock League, but to be honest with you, this is a horrible matchup. You're going up against the Minnesota Vikings. Here, the Vikings are currently favored by about 3.5 points. It should be a very low scoring contest in general. We have seen Roschon take usage both on third downs as well as the 2-minute drill. And we have seen Roschon Johnson actually get involved at the goal line as well, which is very concerning and possibly capping the upside that we have from DeAndre Swift. And if you look at Swift, not only do you have this matchup against Minnesota, but you have 2 matchups coming up against Detroit. You have a matchup coming up against San Fran and another matchup against the Vikings. So this is going to be a brutal spot for DeAndre Swift. Tracy, honestly, I think you can make an argument to move him ahead of Swift. Obviously, we know with Tracy, you're stuck in a garbage offense. They do make the change over to Tommy DeVito. In my mind, I don't think this is going to change much. If you're looking at sportsbook projections at the moment, they currently have the New York Giants with an implied team total of about 18.5 points, which is right about where they have been previously. So doesn't look like a super big difference. Maybe DeVito will check the ball down a little bit more than Daniel Jones did, because one issue that you've had with Tracy is over the past, say, 4 weeks, over the past month with Tracy, you've seen a combined 18 receiving yards. So the receiving involvement just hasn't been there. And at the same time, obviously, it is a bad offense. Ramondre Stevenson will be our next option. With Ramondre, you're going up against Miami, where Miami is favored by about a touchdown. So you'd assume that probably not a spot where the New England Patriots are able to run the ball very often. But also, to be fair to Ramondre Stevenson, most weeks the Patriots are dogs by about 7 points. And you look at over the past 2 weeks, you have 20 carries, you have 20 carries. This past week against the Rams, you actually get the 4 targets as well. Now, of course, Ramondre is just super inefficient with this volume, so it's not like he really does anything with it from a fantasy perspective, but we know what we want to be doing. We want to chase volume every chance that we get, and ultimately that's going to be raising the floor with your players. Now, with Rachaad White, he really hasn't seen much volume over the past month as a rusher, where if you're looking at him over the past 4 games, you're actually only averaging about 6-7 carries per contest. Now, with that being said, the bonus that you are getting with White is the receiving usage. He's actually up at about 5 to 6 targets per contest, which obviously is very beneficial in a full PPR format. Rachaad White crushed against Baltimore. He crushed against Atlanta. Decent performance against KC. He crushed against the Niners. But a lot of this also is just due to the fact that you see the 5 touchdowns through those 4 games. The reality is the volume's not there. The touchdowns have been, but we know that's extremely volatile going into the future. And this is a game going up against the Giants where you probably don't have a ton of Baker Mayfield dropbacks, and it's probably a lower scoring contest overall. Now, I completely understand why everybody and their mom is going to go to the comment section right now and scream at me for having Chuba Hubbard too low. I get it. I can hear you doing it already. And I know we have said over the past 3 weeks now, Jonathan Brooks may come back in this week that could limit Hubbard's touches over and over and over again. We've been saying it. Now, this is the week it actually may happen. And again, I want to reiterate, more likely than not, Chuba Hubbard is the starting running back. They give the man $33 million. He looks like the only talented player that is on this Panthers roster at the moment, at least on the offensive side of the ball, other than the O-line. You've had the receiving usage as well. I mean, back-to-back games with 20 fantasy points. He's been the RB12 in total fantasy points so far this season. He's been great. But when you insert Jonathan Brooks into this offense, if Brooks takes 30% of the backfield, and all of a sudden Chuba Hubbard is in a running back by committee in the worst offense in the NFL. Right now, you have an implied team total about 15.5 points here for the Carolina Panthers. While Chuba Hubbard has absolutely dominated so far this season, I'm very concerned with the matchup, and I'm very concerned that not Jonathan Brooks is going to take the starting job, that Jonathan Brooks is going to come in and see 30-ish% of the backfield, especially if that comes as a receiver, which could cap the overall upside and honestly lower the floor that you're going to get with Hubbard as well. Now, Javonte Williams will be our next back. Obviously, we got the head fake last week where Peyton came through and he said, oh yeah, Audric Estime, we're going to continue to get him more and more involved. And you go from 14 carries for Audric Estime to this past week, you actually have Javonte as the guy, and Estime only sees a total of 6 carries, but Estime does have a couple targets out of the backfield. And this is a phenomenal matchup that you have for Javonte Williams going up against the Raiders. But I'm a little bit worried that maybe the reason why people are all back in on the Javonte train is the fact that you do get the rushing touchdown that is a highlight that showed over and over and over again. Because reality is you only have 14 opportunities. You go back 2 weeks ago and you only have 3 opportunities. So over the past 2 weeks, Javonte's averaging, about 8.5 opportunities a game? Not super encouraging. Now, obviously, it's a phenomenal matchup against the Raiders, one in which the Broncos should be able to easily win and run the ball in the second half. Najee Harris will be our next back here. If you are looking at Najee, this is just supposed to be the lowest game, or at least lowest scoring game in the NFL this week. Right now, you have an implied team total of only 20 points for this Pittsburgh Steelers offense, and you have an implied team total of only 16 points for the Cleveland Browns. An over-under of 36 points. It's going to be a super low-scoring environment. Now, of course, over the past month, every single week, Najee Harris has had double-digit fantasy points, and every single week, he has had, at minimum, 20 opportunities. So to be completely honest with you, I will probably start him in the Flock League this week because it's a double flex format. We have a guy or two on bye, but ultimately I am concerned about the game environment and wanting to start too many Steelers or Browns. Going over to Tony Pollard. With Pollard, this does project to be the second worst offense in the NFL, but now that Tajay Spears is concussed, Pollard could yet again be a viable start, knowing that he could go out there and he could get back to 80+% of the snaps in this backfield, which is what we had for that 3-game stretch with no Tajay Spears. So obviously this Pollard ranking is going to be very much reliant on if Spears is available to play or not. Now, dropping beyond the top 24, this is where I really don't want to start these guys. Bucky Irving, yes, if the touchdown's there, he could be fine, and it's a spot where they're probably going to be able to run the ball consistently against the Giants. And over the past 5 weeks, Bucky has had more of a role than Rachaad White as a rusher in this backfield. Rico Dowdle, it's hard to know exactly what the role is. It's hard to know anything. This is a spread of about 10 points on this game. I think it is maybe the second largest spread or third largest spread in the NFL this week. The Cowboys probably aren't going to be able to run the ball against Washington, even if Dowdle's going to have the vast majority of the usage. Nick Chubb, a horrible matchup going up against Pittsburgh. I mean, this past week, you only see 30% of the snaps against the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, very weird game environment. You do get double-digit touches, but yet again, no role as a receiver. Don't want to start Nick Chubb. I don't want to start Kareem Hunt, obviously under the assumption that we have Isaiah Pacheco good to go. I would rather play Hunt over a couple of these other committee backs, though, because there is that outside chance that they do slow roll Pacheco his first week back in. And obviously, it's a very good matchup going up against Carolina. Austin Eckler, you can't really look at weeks 9, 10. You really can't look at any game besides week 11 for the first 4 weeks prior, just because obviously you had no Brian Robinson. But this past week, you do get the 9 targets, and he leads the team in receiving against the Philadelphia Eagles. But it's very much an outlier if you look at the season-long total, where the previous highest game he had in terms of his targets was 5, so that should come down dramatically. Audric Estime will be our next play. If you're looking at him, you see the usage fall against the Atlanta Falcons. But again, it's a game that's a blowout. Not only is it a blowout, but you do have a little of a positive spin with Estime, and that he does see 3 targets for 3 receptions, which was his first target of the season, first game with him. Jaylen Warren will be our next play. With Warren, you get the double-digit fantasy points this past week. You're just looking at a receiving floor. Jonathan Brooks, again, I want to reiterate, I do think that he could potentially cap the ceiling that you're going to see with Chuba Hubbard. But again, it would be impossible to project Jonathan Brooks ahead of Chuba Hubbard until you see otherwise. Hubbard has been the dominant back in this backfield. Cam Akers definitely gets the receiving touchdown last week, maybe trending in the right direction here. But again, this is a tougher matchup. You do have Aaron Jones another week removed from the injury. And trust me, as someone who started Cam Akers way early in the season when you had no Mixon in Houston, I know this guy's not any good. And then our last tier, you have some handcuffs. You got Roshan, who will have usage on third downs and in the 2-minute drill. I have no idea why the hell I even ranked Gus Edwards here. For the love of God, don't play Gus Edwards. I'd rather play Ford in a full PPR format where maybe you'll have a couple of receptions. Or I'd rather play Justice Hill in a full PPR format where maybe you'll have a couple of receptions. But I think that's all I got for you. Again, I really hope I was able to help you out in some way with this. And if you have not done so already, go over to Underdog Fantasy with the link in the description or comment section. Use promo code FLOCK, and you're going to be getting a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. Plus, at the same time, we'll be getting a free Jameis Winston pick, more than less than half a total yard for the Thursday night game, and a free team review in the live stream we're doing every single night. So just make sure, use code FLOCK and the link in the comment section. But much love, and I really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.